family must have a son to continue the family line. Daughters will eventually get married. As a daughter, you must be humble and sacrifice. How many times have you heard these statements in your life? Maybe from your grandparents, your parents, your teachers, even your most beloved friends. They are repeated as truth, as a matter of course that does not need to be verified. And that is what is scary. Because when a prejudice is repeated enough times, it is no longer questioned. It becomes the foundation of how we perceive the value of ourselves and others. That is when culture begins to manipulate people's emotions. No need to shout, no need to command, just whisper and repeat. Preferring men over women is not simply a discriminatory behavior. It is a form of collective emotional manipulation wrapped up in so-called tradition, but making millions of women feel inferior simply because they were born female. In today's video, we will unpack seemingly harmless statements that are secretly spreading prejudice and manipulating the emotions of generations of women. Why is it called emotional manipulation? It is not always loud. It is not always cruel on the surface. Sometimes it speaks gently. Sometimes it even comes wrapped in what looks like love and care. At its core, emotional manipulation happens when someone or an entire system of thought makes you question your worth. It convinces you that you are not enough, not valuable, not lovable, unless you meet a certain set of expectations. It teaches you that you must change yourself, shrink yourself, sacrifice yourself, or tolerate injustice to be accepted, to be good, to be loved. And all of this is often done in subtle, socially accepted ways. This is exactly what male chauvinism, or the belief that men are inherently superior to women, has done for generations. It didn't just place men on a pedestal. It made women feel like they were somehow wrong for being women. And that is emotional manipulation in its most dangerous form, the kind you don't even realize is happening. Emotional manipulation doesn't always come from anger or violence. In many cultures, it comes dressed as tradition, advice, or how things have always been. A mother tells her daughter, girls should know how to keep their voice down. Boys don't like girls who talk too much. A teacher says, you're very smart for a girl. An aunt suggests, don't study too high, no man will dare marry you. A grandmother sighs, it's sad there's no son to carry on the family name. Nobody yelled, nobody hit, and yet the damage is done. Slowly, these messages accumulate and build an invisible cage. They tell a girl that to be accepted, she must behave a certain way. Be soft, be quiet, be patient, be pleased. Never dream too big. Never be too proud. Never outshine a man. And if she dares to step outside that invisible cage, society has punishments ready. She will be labeled difficult, too ambitious, too emotional, not feminine or the classic, hard to get married. She will be made to feel ashamed for her strength, for her voice, for her independence. She will be told that her dreams are selfish, her emotions are dramatic, and her desire to live for herself is a threat to family values. And perhaps the cruelest part? The manipulation is so normalized, so embedded in culture, that many women do not even recognize it as manipulation. They believe they are the problem, that they are too much, that they are not enough, that maybe, just maybe, if they were quieter, nicer, more giving, they would finally be loved. That's how emotional manipulation works, not by telling you outright that you're worthless, but by making you work endlessly to prove your worth, without ever giving you the chance to feel it. And it is not always done by men. In fact, one of the most heartbreaking realities is that women, mothers, sisters, grandmothers can also become instruments of this manipulation, not because they are evil, but because they too were raised in it. They too were taught that their value came from how well they served others, how much they endured, how small they could become to fit into a man's world. Male chauvinism, then, is not just about individual beliefs. It's not just one man's opinion or one family's tradition. It's a system that manipulates entire generations into playing roles they never chose. It teaches men that their power comes from dominance, and women that their worth comes from obedience. It hurts both sides in different ways, but the scars are real, and still it hides behind the mask of culture. It tells us this is just the way things are. That's the line manipulation always used to silence resistance. But we must ask, who benefits from things staying this way, and who gets hurt? When you're made to feel inferior because of your gender, that is not a cultural value. That is emotional control. That is a cage built not with iron bars, but with expectations so subtle you end up locking the door yourself. And the most dangerous part is this: the person being manipulated often doesn't even realize it. They think they're being respectful. They think they're being good. They think they're doing the right thing. Until one day, something inside them whispers, "This isn't who I really am. This isn't the life I wanted." And maybe that whisper becomes a question. And maybe that question becomes a rebellion. And maybe that rebellion is not loud or angry, but steady. A decision to live with dignity, even if it means being misunderstood. A decision to stop proving your worth to people who only love the version of you that stays quiet. Because once you name manipulation, you stop being controlled by it. The deep consequences not just for women. Many people believe that patriarchy, the deeply rooted belief system that prioritizes men over women, only oppresses women. But the truth is more complicated. A sexist society may appear to benefit men on the surface, but in reality, it harms both genders, just in different ways, equally devastating, equally dehumanizing. Patriarchy is not just about who holds more power. It's about who is allowed to be fully human. And under its shadow, no one truly is. For women, the inheritance of invisibility. From the moment they are born, many girls begin receiving subtle and not so subtle messages that their place in the world is second, not because they are less capable, not because they lack talent or ambition, but simply because they are girls. They are told directly or indirectly that dreaming too big is selfish, that being assertive is unattractive, that a girl who speaks her mind is too much, while one who stays quiet is well behaved. They are praised for sacrificing, for enduring, for making others comfortable, even at the cost of their own discomfort. As a result, many women grow up without ever fully discovering who they are. They learn to adapt to other people's expectations so early that they forget what they wanted in the first place. They become experts at pleasing, but strangers to themselves. She may be kind, capable, generous, loved by many, but inside she feels a quiet hollowness. Not because she lacks love, but because she senses a painful truth. The love she receives is not always for her authentic self. It's for the version of her that learned to shrink, to perform, to be acceptable. This is the silent tragedy of many women's lives, a life lived in disguise, a soul buried beneath social approval. For men, the inheritance of emotional silence. At first glance, it may seem like men are the winners in a patriarchal system. They are given more power, more freedom, more permission to lead. But look closer, because underneath the surface lies a burden no one wants to carry. From a young age, boys are taught to be tough, to win, to never show weakness, to suppress softness. A boy who cries is told to man up. A boy who expresses fear or vulnerability is labeled as weak. They are trained to armor themselves before they even understand what they're protecting. And that armor becomes a cage, because while the world allows them to lead, it does not allow them to feel. It expects them to be providers, protectors, problem solvers, but not human beings with emotional needs, not boys who feel insecure, not men who feel sadness, not fathers who are overwhelmed, not sons who are scared. And so they carry their wounds in silence. Many men grow up disconnected from their emotional world. They don't know how to express tenderness, how to ask for help, or how to name their inner pain. Instead, they may channel it into anger, addiction, control, or emotional distance, not because they are heartless, but because they were never taught how to be whole. They are told that to be a man is to be invulnerable. But this false version of masculinity becomes their prison, a place where they must constantly perform strength, even when they're falling apart inside. And that too is a deep and devastating kind of loss. For families and society, a rigged system that fails everyone. At the heart of this ideology lies a rigid, artificial division of roles, one that insists men must lead and women must follow. That men must protect and women must obey. That men must earn and women must serve, but real life is not that black and white. People are not roles. People are not categories. A woman may be born with leadership in her bones. A man may carry the gift of deep emotional insight. A girl may dream of science, and a boy may long to dance, but the system doesn't care. It doesn't ask who you are, it tells you who to be. And when people are forced to live in roles they did not choose, society loses something irreplaceable. Creativity dies. Authenticity is buried. Relationships suffer. A mother may raise her children with love, but with hidden resentment for the dreams she never got to chase. A father may provide for his family, but feel isolated, emotionally distant, or chronically stressed. Children may grow up not knowing what real love looks like, only duty and silence. When we ask everyone to conform to a pattern instead of honoring who they truly are, we strip away the vitality of the whole community. We build a society where people are exhausted, disconnected, and unfulfilled. We prioritize order over truth, performance over presence, and that cost is too high. The silent agreement that needs to be broken. The most dangerous thing about patriarchy is how normal it feels. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It hides behind tradition. It justifies itself with religion. It presents itself as care or family values or how things have always been. It convinces people, especially the ones it hurts the most, that this is just the natural order of things. But nothing about inequality is natural. Nothing about silencing a girl's dreams or denying a boy's emotions is healthy. Nothing about expecting someone to live in fear, shame, or duty is love. That's not culture. That's control. And control passed down long enough begins to look like culture. But we can break that cycle. Not by fighting one another, but by seeing the deeper truth that both women and men are hurting. And that healing does not come from switching roles or blaming each other. It comes from building a new foundation, where being human matters more than performing gender. It comes from teaching girls that their dreams are sacred, that their value is not in their silence, but in their truth, that they do not have to earn love through sacrifice. It comes from telling boys that strength includes softness, that real courage is in feeling, not just fighting, that they do not have to carry the world alone. It comes from rewriting this story, not just for women or men, but for everyone. Because freedom is not when one group rises above the other. Freedom is when everyone gets to be real. Subtle manifestations of male chauvinism in modern life. Not many people today say out loud, men are better than women. And yet, somehow that belief still shows up every single day. Not in bold slogans, not in loud debates, but in decisions, reactions, and norms so familiar that we barely notice them anymore. It's in the way inheritance is divided, where sons are prioritized because they carry the family name, even though it's often the daughters who are by their parents' side through illness, aging, and loss. It's in the casual comment made to a young girl when she dreams out loud about a career. Why study so much? You're just going to get married anyway. It's in how we praise women not for their intelligence or authenticity, but for how much they can endure, how patient they are, how much they are willing to give up. Sacrifice has become synonymous with femininity. And when a woman dares to step outside of that frame, when she dares to put herself first, speak her mind, or live by her own rules, she is quietly judged, labeled as selfish, or worse, too much. This is not the kind of male chauvinism that shouts. It's the kind that whispers and whispers so softly for so long that even women start to believe it. The invisible cage. In modern society, the idea that women must be less is no longer written in law, but it is still written in expectation. We see it in the media and the stories we're told from childhood. The ideal woman is everywhere. She is beautiful, but not intimidating. Intelligent, but not too outspoken. Gentle, selfless, supportive. She doesn't threaten a man's ego. She knows when to stay quiet. She knows how to take a step back to preserve harmony. And while there's nothing wrong with being gentle or supportive, the problem arises when this becomes the only acceptable mold for being a good woman. These expectations, repeated through generations, become invisible burdens. Women are told to be everything but never too much, be good but not assertive, be smart but not opinionated, be accomplished but never outshine a man. This constant measuring this need to adjust oneself to be more acceptable becomes a lifetime of self-doubt, of shrinking, of living halfway between who they are and who they're allowed to be. And when a woman fails to meet these impossible standards, she doesn't always get angry at the world. More often, she turns inward, she blames herself. Maybe I wasn't soft enough. Maybe I was too ambitious. Maybe I made people uncomfortable. And that's how the system wins, when the victim stops resisting and starts believing. Prejudice in disguise. Today's patriarchy no longer walks around waving flags. It has learned to adapt. It wears polite smiles, sits at family dinners, and nods in agreement while quietly enforcing old rules through new means. It's the sigh of disappointment when a woman gives birth to a daughter instead of a son. It's the worried look exchanged by relatives when a girl says she doesn't want to get married. It's the joke about a woman boss being too intense or too emotional. It's the subtle distrust of a woman's leadership no matter how capable she is. These are obvious acts of discrimination, but they are acts of quiet resistance against the possibility that women could exist outside of the roles they've been boxed into. What makes this even more damaging is that it's hard to name. How do you explain a look? A sigh? A silence? These micro-prejudices are rarely loud enough to confront, but always present enough to feel. This form of emotional manipulation, when rooted deeply enough, makes women question their worth not because they are being oppressed violently, but because they are being doubted gently. The cost of normalizing inequality. When society treats inequality as normal, it stops being questioned. That is the true danger. Because when you normalize the idea that girls are expected to give more, endure more, and expect less, then you raise generations who believe that their dreams are optional, that their voice is secondary, that their life is for others. Call for awareness. No one should be labeled because of gender. We cannot continue to see this issue as if it is only a matter of old-fashioned men or backward families. Fact is, many men today are waking up and supporting equality. Many women are no longer resigned to being themselves. But the ideology of male superiority over female inferiority is still being transmitted, not by specific individuals, but by the collective culture we breathe together every day. It is time to ask the question again. Why, when a girl reaches 30, people always ask, "When are you getting married?" instead of asking, "How are you doing?" Why do boys have to learn to suppress their emotions, and girls have to learn to accept silence? We need to teach boys that crying does not make them weak. It makes them stronger. Girls need to be taught that saying no is a survival skill, not a sign of stubbornness. And above all, we need to learn to respect diversity, not to judge anyone based on their gender. Traditions can be beautiful, but not all traditions should be maintained. Traditions need to be refined to fit a humane, fair society where everyone can be true to themselves. Closing message: awareness is power. Changing a culture doesn't start with big slogans. It starts with awareness in every single word, every single action. It's when you choose not to ask a girl about her husband and children before asking about her happiness. It's when you see a man in tears and don't immediately tell him, "Don't be weak." It's when you hear a familiar story and realize for the first time that it's not okay. If you're a girl who's ever been overlooked just because you're a girl, please know you're not wrong. It's the beliefs that someone tried to impose on you that are wrong. And today, you have the power to choose what's right for yourself. If you've ever felt like you're not enough just because you're a girl, it's time to remember you don't need to prove your worth by sacrificing. You're enough just by existing. And when you dare to be authentic, you not only heal yourself, you pave the way for other girls to be authentic. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.